How do you stay positive when it feels like the world is ending? Well, I'll tell you how I do it. Hey, you, how's it going? How are you? It's AD Roundtree. Welcome to this, your Thursday edition of the show. Yeah, Thursday. That means this time tomorrow, you will have officially made it through yet another week. This is no small accomplishment. You're doing awesome. Hang in there. You got this. You are a badass. And if you need something, if there's anything I can do for you to make your Thursday better, hit me up. I'm here with you. I'm here for you. At ADSXE, it's where you can find me on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at ADSXE. Put it in your phone now in case you need it later. So, first and foremost, thank you to everyone that has decided to kick in and support the podcast on Patreon. You can do that too. Patreon.com/ADSXE. That's patreon.com/ADSXE. I'm figuring out this podcast stuff as I go, but I don't want to make it something you ever pay a subscription for. I don't ever want to put this behind a paywall because most of these are conversations about mental health. And as I've said over and over again, I feel like those should be free to all for all time. But what I think I've worked out a way to do is to allow you, if you're a patron on Patreon, to listen to the episodes commercial free. Patreon.com/ADSXE. Thank you so much for supporting. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you for being a part of my radio family. I got an email from Olivia who said, "Hey, AD, how do you do it? How do you keep going and stay positive? Every day for the last few months, I can barely get out of bed. And I have it relatively easy. I have it way better than a lot of people. I have a stable job and a loving family. I love listening to you on the radio, and I love listening to your podcast because you're always so positive and uplifting. But I look at everything you've been through recently, and I feel guilty that I can't be positive like you. Life has been having its way with me over the last few months. There's no two ways about it." She said, "I'm so sorry about the loss of your father, and everything you went through to bring him home sounds excruciating. Your professional life has gone through a big change too, and yet there you are, picking us all up again on the podcast. How do you do it?" Well, if you're just listening to the podcast for the first time, what Olivia was gently saying was, yeah, life has been unbelievably rough for the last few months. Back in November, a little before Thanksgiving, my dad had a medical emergency where he lives in Kosovo. He was rushed to hospital. I flew out there to bring him back on what was supposed to be a 2-3 day trip. They're like, we got to tweak this, adjust that, make sure he's clear of this, and he can be fit to fly. He can get on a plane. He can come back home to America for more treatment. Every step of the way got more complicated and more difficult. I wound up being there for a month and a half. During that time, my time on your radio came to an end. I'd been on your radio starting with 94.5 The Buzz in Houston, Texas, and eventually about 50 stations all over the country for around 17 years, and continuing to do that job while I was in the situation I was in with my father, looking after him in a foreign country, 2 foreign countries. We had to travel to Macedonia to get him a new pacemaker. Well, that just wasn't a thing. And Olivia's right. It was unbelievably tough. Unbelievably tough. Like I said, every step of the way got more complicated and difficult and unwieldy, and it seemed like we were climbing a higher and higher mountain to get my father home. It was not easy. It was not fun. And I was going through some stuff that was kind of nuts out there because the level of care in those countries, in the Balkans region, Kosovo, Macedonia, places like that, the level of care was great. The doctors were great. In fact, many of them had trained in America at hospitals I'd been to at, I think it was St. Luke's in Houston. That's where his heart doctor trained, a place I had experience with. So the level of care was great, but the amount of staff was not anywhere near adequate. COVID stressed out an already understaffed medical system. And And because of that, I hired a nurse to look after my dad. And then I looked after my dad. We would take it in 12-hour shifts at the hospital. Did this for a month and a half. It was my job to do all sorts of things I did not know how to do. Looking after my father, who is bedridden. And Olivia's right. Wasn't easy. Wasn't fun. That was in many ways the most difficult and challenging and miserable thing I have ever been through. And during that time, I started this podcast. And I did it to, keep the conversations going with people that have been listening to me on the radio for 17 years. But I also did it because, quite frankly, this podcast, this has been part of what helps me stay positive. Why? Because, well, very generously, Olivia and people like Olivia, hopefully you, if you're listening to this, have said that they found me positive and uplifting and a bright spot in their day. That was my whole goal when I started radio, to keep you company when you needed it, to lift you up, to make your commute, whether that was in the morning or in the afternoon, something that you maybe even looked forward to, as opposed to just sitting in traffic. Make it something where you're hanging around in your car for a little bit longer than you had to because you were enjoying your time with me. It was my job and my mission, if you will, to brighten your day. It was my little way of trying to leave the world a little bit better than I found it every single day, by keeping you company when you need it, by making you feel like someone was thinking about you, which I was, and by making you know that somebody had your back at all times, which I did and I do. And so that was a big part of how I stay positive. It makes me feel better to think that maybe I'm making your day a little bit better. And then, yeah, Olivia, you're right, it has been rough. Eventually, I got my father home. Made all these plans for his long-term care and what the next phase of his life would be, and sadly, we lost my dad a few weeks ago. Didn't work out the way I'd hoped. And it has been tough. Grief is a wild ride. There's no getting around it. You don't manage grief. Grief manages you. It comes and goes. Hits you in waves. Devastating waves that leave you in tears and unable to really do anything other than to sink into it and accept it. It's not easy. I understand that over time, these waves get smaller and further apart. But I'm still going through it. Yet, here I am talking to you, sounding, and I got to be honest with you, feeling pretty upbeat. Why? Because I look forward to this time. This is a time where I get some relief from all of that. And I guess it comes from the fact that I'm helping to lift people up, or trying to lift people up, thinking that I might do that. And judging by what you've been telling me since the podcast started, some of the times it's working out that way. This time that you and I spend together, it really is the best part of my day. And I'm happy to hear that it's the best part of your day too, to the people that have been telling me this. So that really helps. Now, you don't have to have a podcast. You don't have to have a radio show. You can lift the people up around you just by being you and the best version of yourself and caring. But let me rewind a little bit. Olivia says, I can barely get out of bed for the last few months. And I have it relatively easy. I've got it better than a lot of people. Got it better than you. How are you managing to stay positive? Well, Olivia, it's late February. And what you are talking about sounds like depression. Now, I'm not a shrink. I'm not a doctor. I'm not qualified to dispense any kind of advice of any kind. But what you're going through, to me, if it's anything like what I've been through and many people I've talked to have been through, could be depression, could be seasonal depression. The days get shorter, the nights get longer, darker, colder, and after the holidays are done, you're kind of left with this gray malaise that you got to get through until spring has sprung. I don't know if that's the case but I definitely relate to what you are talking about. Because, well, here's the thing. I managed to stay positive because I've sort of been dealing with depression for my entire life. Now, this does not make me more interesting. This doesn't make me different. This doesn't make me special. This is something that the vast majority of us will go through at least one time in our lives, and probably off and on again. And it's something I've been dealing with my entire life. And because of that, I've been lucky. I have learned what helps me managing it. And what helps me manage depression, I think the main things for me are what we were talking about. Lifting other people up. That makes me happier. If I know I've made a positive difference in someone's day, literally anyone's day, whether it's yours, whether it's millions of people on the radio, whether it's someone at the grocery store, someone I see in the street. The idea that maybe I brighten someone's day makes me happier. Focuses me away from myself and thinking about others. It's a weird contradictory thing because we tend to focus on ourselves when we get depressed, bummed out, whatever you want to call it. But focusing away from yourself, thinking about the happiness and well-being of others when all you want to think about is yourself and how to be happier has a weird way of turning your own frown upside down. At least I've found this, and there's some literature that supports this. So there's that. There's trying to lift other people up, knowing that it will lift you up. This is one of the ways I manage depression, and this is one of the reasons that I do what I've always done, which is be on your radio and try and make your day a little bit better. Hopefully I'm making your day better, but it's sort of self-serving because, well, it puts a smile on my face too. It's good stuff. And like I said, you don't have to be on the radio. You don't have to have a podcast. You can affect the people around you that you come into contact with, friends, family, loved ones, strangers in the street or in the parking lot of the grocery store. You have an opportunity to do this. I came to the conclusion a little while ago that if you see an opportunity to help someone without expecting anything in return, if you're able to help that person, you should just go ahead and do it. It's a big part of what I think is going to help make the world continue to turn. If you get a chance to help, do it. Big believer in that, especially if you're struggling with your own feelings. So, doing what you can to affect the people around you, bring them up, make them happier, 9 times out of 10, I find it puts a smile on my face. That's one of the ways that I manage depression. That's one of the ways I manage to stay positive. Now, I do not mean to trivialize, or don't want to come across that I'm trivializing depression. There are people that'll be like, what? Go outside, get in the sun, put a smile on your face, and, your face will tell the rest of you that you're happy. Yeah, go for a walk, you'll feel better. There are times where that's just not going to cut it. If you are able to talk to a therapist, if there is medication that is recommended to you, it might be necessary to do that to get you through what you're going through. It's not just going to magically solve everything that you put a smile on someone else's face. But I will tell you this, it's not going to hurt anything. And if you are doing everything else, if you are maybe seeing a therapist, or if you decide to talk to a therapist, if you do decide to maybe take medication that they recommend and prescribe to you, do not try and self-medicate. You can't figure this stuff out yourself. You got to go with a medical professional. But even if you decide to take those steps, trying to lift other people up, well, that'll only be a stronger combination when it comes to combating what you're describing as the winter blues. And then the other big thing, the main thing, is exercise. Several years back, I was seeing a therapist who, by the way, I recently started talking to again after I got back from the experience with my father after he passed away. I was like, ooh, I got a lot to unpack. I have been through some things, and I think there's little bits and pieces of me that are never coming back from Kosovo and Macedonia, and I need some help sorting through it. So I started talking to the same guy again. But years ago, when I first started seeing him, I was like, I think I'm depressed. He was like, oh, yeah, you really are. I was like, what do you do? What can I do? He's like, well, there's one of two things. One, I could medicate you. Two, you could exercise. And I was like, ooh, exercise. He's like, yeah, go to the gym. Get off the couch. To the point of sweating for like 20 minutes a day. I was like, well, that sounds like a lot of work. He was like, it might be. I was like, I'll take the medication, please. And he said, here's the thing. If you take medication, it might change your personality. I've heard your show, and I think that the personality might be kind of important. Is your personality important? I was like, yeah, it's sort of what pays the mortgage and stuff. And he was like, well, then try exercising. Try moving to the point of sweating for like 20 or so minutes a day. And he explained to me that this produces a lot of the same chemical reactions that medication like serotonin uptake reinhibitors, I think I've got that right, SSRIs, whatever the case may be, whatever antidepressant you're on, there's a reasonably good chance that exercise mimics the chemical reaction it causes in your brain. And I was like, well, gee, doc, if that's the case, why do we have medication? If, doing jumping jacks, sit-ups, and spending some time on the treadmill is the same as Prozac, or whatever the hell is my medical alternative to this exercise you've talked about, how come everybody doesn't just, do the jumping jacks? And he's like, well, when you're depressed, it can be really, really difficult to peel yourself off the couch to do it. And I was like, interesting. Okay. I'll give the exercise thing a go. Overnight, I felt different. Right after getting out of the gym, I felt different. And look, one of the most difficult things that you or I will ever do is be consistent with exercise. But I find that if I remember to move, if I remember to get the heart rate up, if I remember to get the blood moving and the heart pumping and all of the above, generally speaking, mentally, things turn around pretty quickly. So you ask how I'm positive and uplifting, and it really comes down to a few things. One, I try and exercise because that makes a huge difference to my state of mind. Your body will lead your mind, I think is the expression. Your body leads your mind, so look after it. And that's difficult. That's tough. It's tough to feel okay about yourself when you miss a week or a month or however long it is in the gym. But those physical changes you make in the gym, becoming a ripped-toned, shredded, single-digit body fat, having super athlete in time to parade that noticeable six-pack around the pool or the beach all summer long. The physical changes take a while, but I noticed that the mental changes from exercise are there almost immediately. So if you are having a difficult time with your state of mind, I wholeheartedly recommend and endorse something that causes you to sweat for about 20 minutes at a time. Give that a go. And like I said, this is not to put Band-Aids on a flesh wound. You might have more serious problems. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a shrink. I'm not, in any way, shape, or form qualified to dispense advice or to analyze what is going on with you. But if it is similar to the things I've been through, making an effort to be a positive force in the world, in other people's lives, and exercise, well, that's kind of how I do it. You ask how I did it, that's how I do it. The other thing that I do when I have time, and again, it's difficult to be consistent with, is I found that the real relief from the grief, the mourning, the shock that my system is going through after all this stuff comes from getting my heart rate up and getting my heart rate down. getting my heart rate up is the exercise, the sweating, the blood pumping, and all of the above that you and I just talked about. Also, when I can, I try and meditate for 20 or so minutes a day. And what I get out of meditation, I think is, well, it's two things. It's similar to what some people get out of drinking or smoking a joint or maybe smoking a cigarette. For the 20 minutes or so that I'm doing it, it's tough to describe, and if you've done this before, you know it, and if not, you might not be able to understand, but I get relief from the thoughts that plague my mind. They are still there, but they're not dominant. I'm not focused on them. I am kind of sort of very present, yet somewhere else. It's a difficult thing to describe, but meditation, I think, has done a lot of things for me. And it's something that I'd done in the past, and it's something that I took up again after I was dealing with my dad's passing. And in the past, I used to do exercise or meditation. I only had time for one or the other. Now, I am unemployed, so I got a little bit more recreational time on my hands, a little more time to indulge in some self-care. So I try and exercise pretty much every day, and I try and meditate pretty much every day. I get the heart rate up and I get the heart rate down. And not only does it give me sort of a temporary escape from being plagued by this stuff, even though mentally I'm still dealing with it during that 20 minutes of meditating, but it also contributes to a bit of an overall, I don't want to say calm, because it doesn't make me calm. It doesn't stop me freaking out. It doesn't make me less aggressive, less unhappy, less, those emotions are all still very much there. But there is an overall pleasant difference to the day when I meditate for 20 minutes. And when I meditate for 20 minutes for 5 days in a row, 7 days in a row, when I manage to do it more consistently, that builds and builds and builds. And it really is something I've found to be very valuable. So to reiterate, if you are dealing with the blues, if you are dealing with depression, first and foremost, recognize that it's okay to not be okay. You, me, all of us, we will all go through this at some point in our lives. Therapy might be necessary. Medication might be the best option for you. But the things that I can always fall back on, rely on to manage my state of mind are exercise, trying to turn your frown upside down or anybody else's. That in turn makes me feel better. And meditation. These are the three pillars of me kind of making it through. I hope that is useful to you. And I hope that you will try one of, if not all of these things. And let me know how it goes. Thank you so much for hanging out. Thank you for being a part of my radio family. As always, this time that you and I spent together, it really is the best part of my day every single day. I'll be back tomorrow. We'll do it all over again. Have a great one. Later.